Hello, friends, and welcome to episode number 52 of Nostalgia Talk. Where do we go from episode number 51, episode number 52? Wow, I just realized something. I've been doing Nostalgia Talk for 2 years now, and I get asked sometimes if this is weekly, and there's 52 weeks in a whole year. It's been about 2 years, and now we're on episode number 52. That's funny, but again, this is more of a whatever happens happens kind of thing. Anyway, welcome to episode number 52 of Nostalgia Talk. I'm James, and joining me this time is a creative genius. Yes, creative genius, the one and only DJ MacHALE. DJ, good to see you again.
Even though you can't see me because my camera's not working, but yes, I am here. But good to see you too, James.
Good to see you as well. Now, for any of the listeners who don't know, unless you saw my little recap video of the week that I had going to HalCon and to the Simple Plan concert, well, Offspring, but let's be honest, Simple Plan for me. But if you missed that video, let me explain. DJ and I have met before. We met at HalCon, which was and that was actually kind of interesting because I didn't really, not to sound like a terrible researcher, but I didn't really know who he was. But as I was putting together my schedule for HalCon, I had to figure out where I was going to go. And I saw an event called Write a Movie Scene in 10 Minutes. And I thought, oh, that's cool. And that's what I want to do for a living. And so I read about it, and it said, you're going to be instructed by DJ MacHALE, who wrote the Nickelodeon show and created the show Are You Afraid of the Dark? And I was like, well, that's interesting because Nickelodeon is the very thing that made me want to become a screenwriter and made me want to work in the film industry. I am going to take this class. So I went in and he talked a little bit about his life and career and stories that you're going to hear today. And then he put us to work with the writing assignment, and he says to us, don't stop. You can finish your scene, but don't stop. Don't think, because when you're not thinking, when you're thinking, you're not writing. And no erasing, because some of you guys are probably just starting, so there's no mistakes. And so the basic point was to pick up a scene with 4 lines. Line number 1, I don't want to go to school today or work. Either way. Line number 2, you have to. Number 3, you can't make me. Number 4, but then you'll miss the surprise. That surprise was completely up to us. And so I wrote, I basically took out a chunk of the first thing I ever wrote when I realized I wanted to become a writer, which was a basic teen angst story because I was a teenager at the time. And I wrote, you might surprise yourself by doing well on a test. And DJ looks at everyone, he goes, ooh, that's good. He called it a typical teen angst story. And the very next day he held a screening of Are You Afraid of the Dark? And he took some Q&A. Being a set dresser, I had a question about the set design, and he sees who the mic's going to, and he's like, we have a real writer here today. So thank you for acknowledging me as a real writer, DJ.
There you go. My pleasure.
And for anyone who doesn't know DJ's career, as I said, he created Are You Afraid of the Dark? He wrote a bunch of the episodes and directed many of them as well. Sometimes he was credited as DJ MacHALE. Other times he was credited as Chloe Brown for some reason. In addition to that, he also created Flight 29 Down for Discovery Kids and wrote Tower of Terror, the Disney movie, and authored the book series Pendragon and Morpheus Road. So, DJ, it's really good to see you again, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your stories.
It's great to be here. That's you just gave my career in a nutshell, or a lot of it anyway.
Yeah, pretty much. So let's begin by talking a little bit about your writing inspiration. Like, what did you want to be more of a screenwriter or a book author?
I didn't want to do any kind of writing actually.
Oh yeah.
When I was a kid, I don't know if I said this in the class we did, but I got into writing because I hated to write, and and that was as far back as as far back as I can remember. I was a little kid, but it was in junior high school that there was a guy in our school who was a media specialist, and I don't know if he knew I was having trouble writing or whatever, but he said, DJ, we just got this thing in. Do you want to use it? And he called it a portable videotape recorder, which back in the early 70s, there was nothing portable about this thing. And he said, "Do you want to use it?" And I was like, "No, I don't." But then I thought, "Oh, this is good." So from that moment on, this was eighth grade. From that moment on to the end of high school, in order to get out of writing, in high school you have to write reports and essays and book reports
Mhm.
and all that kind of good stuff. In order to get out of that, my buddies and I, whenever we were given an assignment, we would make a videotape about the subject instead, or a film about the subject.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I remember you showed me a little behind, or showed us in the class a little behind the scenes picture of one of them. I think one of you was dressed as the Marx Brothers.
yeah, it was a Marx Brothers movie. We made a 90-minute long Marx Brothers movie, which was a ridiculous undertaking, but I learned a lot. And thinking I was getting out of writing, but the whole time, there's just as much, just different kind of writing. It's not sitting there writing prose. It's writing stories and just like anything. So, so, but in answer really directly to your question, I never imagined being an author. It was always about screenwriting, and I went to film school and got into TV and wrote a billion things, and most of which were produced, a lot of which were produced, and directing and producing. And it wasn't until, oh boy, maybe the early 2000s that I decided, I had an idea for a book. And I said, boy, I think I'm going to try to write a book. And not thinking it was ever even going to get published. Um, but I wrote it and it got published and it became a 10 book series, international bestseller. And then I've since written another 15, 20 books and plus spin-offs and all that kind of stuff. So I became an author. That was not in the plan at all. Believe me, that was not in the plan. Because that really is flat out writing. That's just sitting there in front of your computer, just writing stuff. The long answer to your question is it was always a screenwriting, and I still consider myself a screenwriter. No one's ever accused me of writing great lyrical prose. It's my books are pretty much like reading screenplays. It's what you read is what you get. Um, they're very visual, which what screenplays are. The thing about screenplays is that you have to use a real economy of words to paint a picture. You
Right.
can't go off and start writing about thought process and describing things. It's boom, boom, boom. You've got to describe it accurately and thoroughly, but using a few words. And so that if with that in mind, you read my books, you realize, oh yeah, this guy's a screenwriter. That's
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I've noticed when I was starting to get into screenwriting, I noticed that a lot of the movies that were new at the time, like versions of The Hunger Games and Divergent, I'm thinking to myself, these movies are really successful because they're all based upon books. I mean, like I go to a movie that's an original film and nobody I know is seeing it. Like, you know what I mean?
say that again. You go. Oh, no one's seeing original stories.
At that time, because like there was so much that was that was all adaptations. Like there was this was 2015, so there was a film version of Divergent, there was one of The Hunger Games, and like I'd go to a film that was an original story and no one my age was going to it. They'd never even heard of it.
Well, that's actually kind of sad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, like
Because
my
there are a
like
lot of
my
great movies that are made that are original.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, like a lot of the Disney Pixar films, like they're not adaptations. I mean, they might seem like they come from somewhere, but they're not
Mhm.
adaptations. They are original stories.
Well, when my first book, The Merchant of Death came out, I went to a bookstore like all authors do, at least first-time authors. You want to see your book on the shelf,
Mhm.
and and I did, and it was pretty cool. It was right next to my favorite book of all time, actually. It was The Call of the Wild by Jack London. So that was like, oh boy, I'm
Nice.
not, I'm not worthy for this. But but I was kind of being a fly on the wall, and there was a mom there with her son, who was probably 12 years old or something like that. And they were looking for a book to read. And so I asked the mom, I said, so what's the criteria here? And she said, the criteria is I'm looking for books that are good. And he's looking for books that he's already seen the movie. It's because it's easy, it's like, and it's a real shame because um, it goes back to how many reboots of shows are being done, and
Yeah.
it's like nothing original being done, and it's
Mhm.
it's lazy, and it's lazy on everyone's part. It's lazy on the filmmaker's part. It's lazy on the writer's part. It's certainly lazy on the studio's part, and it's lazy on the viewer's part that they'll only go to see things that has been something before, and so it's really kind of depressing, frankly.
I mean, I watch TV shows like that ended years ago. Like a lot of what I watch is from before I was born. Like
Mhm.
what are some shows that I really really like? Here's a good example. Somebody that was actually at HalCon. Boy Meets World. Will Friedle
Mhm.
was
Oh
there.
yeah, yeah.
hmm I got along with him very well. I actually hung out with him a couple of times.
Oh, cool.
Um, so with writing,
Oh, actually, let me throw this at you. There's
okay.
something that's kind of this is kind of good news, bad news.
hmm
Um, there's something interesting. You talk about like guys your age or guys my age, because I'm an old guy, is that people my age have an interesting perspective on the history of media.
hmm
And one of the reasons for that, if not the biggest reason for that, is that when we were growing up, when we were your age, there wasn't a whole lot out there. And it's not because there wasn't a whole lot that was being made, it's that there wasn't cable TV yet. There certainly was not streaming yet. There was not home
Oh
DVD
yeah.
video stream that didn't exist. So where I grew up in New York, there were three channels and a couple of local channels. And what they would do to fill out their broadcast day is that they would show movies and TV shows from way they licensed it from way back when. So I grew up. The fact that taking this full circle, the fact that I was knowledgeable enough to make a movie about the Marx Brothers at 16 years old. You say to most 16-year-olds today, "Hey, did you ever hear the Marx Brothers?" They're like, "No."
Yeah, I get that a lot too. Like not just with the Marx Brothers, but with a lot of stuff that I watch and listen to. Like people are like, "What in the hell are you talking about?"
Yeah. Well, and the kind of the good news for that is because there's so much available to everybody today. I
hmm
mean, I guarantee I could go right now. I could, because I have like 15 million streaming channels and whatnot. I could probably find the Marx Brothers movie on there. But no kid of 15 years old is going to go and look and watch a Marx Brothers movie. It's just not going to happen. It's always got to be what was made yesterday.
Mm.
So I really feel bad for I feel bad for these kids today, these young whippersnappers. They just don't have the same historical context of everything. It sounds like you have a little bit more of that. The fact that you'd even watch a show from the 90s, that's for somebody
Yeah,
like
I mean, for a show called Nostalgia Talk, big surprise, right?
yeah, you would think. I
That's
well,
why I
frankly,
started it.
well, I even have friends who are not that much younger than I am, who it's like they don't even listen to music that wasn't of their era. And it's like, are
Dude.
you kidding me? There's so much, there's something so much new that's coming out that's so wonderful. There's so much that's before your era, but unless it was a hair band from the 80s, they don't want to listen to it. I was like, oh my gosh, you're missing out on so much.
Yeah,
So so like nostalgia talk's a good thing.
yeah, I know. I put on a song by All Time Low at work, and somebody's like, "Will you shut that off?" So
Yeah.
with writing, do you remember your first ever like published piece? Do you remember the first thing that ever either was published or that aired, like the first piece of writing that was ever like approved for anything?
I absolutely do. Well, another way you ask the question is, what was the first thing you were paid for? That's a that's a good way to put it. Yes,
Yeah,
I
what was the
have.
first thing you ever paid for?
That's and I know I saved a copy of it. This is it's kind of fun and embarrassing at the same time. Um, when I first got out of school, I went to film school. I didn't get a job in the entertainment industry right away. I started writing scripts to try to sell them and try to break in and whatnot. And it took a long time before I kind of found my voice. But I was fortunate in that my day job, my waiter's job, if you will, was also in the film industry. It
Oh
was in
wow.
the, it was in the lowest rung of the film industry, but I was writing and directing and producing what are called industrial films, and that's a very big umbrella as to what makes an industrial film. Basically, industrial films are any kind of film that's sponsored, that someone pays because they want this film to be made. They're not entertainment. They're usually informational, or they're instructional, or they're for promotion or for marketing. Or so I've made films for every major corporation you can imagine. I made how-to things. I made video owners manuals for people who got new cars. I introduced new product. It was amazing, and it was great learning experience to all writers out there. That it was, in shooting these films and writing and directing, producing these films. I went all over the country, all over North America, um, and got to see
Wow.
so many different ways of life and different people, separate from whatever the film was I was making. But it was exposed to so many different types of people and ways of living and cultures. And I draw upon that to this day when I'm coming up with characters. So the first thing that I was paid for was a public service announcement, a 30-second televised public service announcement for the American Veterinary Medical Association that warned people of the dangers of parvovirus for dogs.
Ooh.
Yes, which to this day, whenever I see someone walking their puppy, I'm like, "Is that dog been vaccinated?" I know because
God.
parvovirus is a big thing. So
Hmm.
yeah, I saved that script. It was a 30-second informational script about parvovirus. So that was, and the fact that I got paid $1 for it or whatever it was, it's just like, wow, I'm a professional writer now.
It was $1. Wow. I mean,
Well, it's
that's,
more than $1, but
that's still pretty good. I mean, like, I got my first ever published writing piece published over the summer, actually. I did not get paid for it.
oh,
It was a blog post, actually.
okay,
Um, I did a nostalgia talk in June that was a tribute to an animator named Abe Levito. Abe worked do you know who Chuck Jones is?
sure, yes,
So I guess it's hard to work in the film industry and not know who Chuck
I could.
Jones is.
If my camera was working, I could show you a cartoon cell I have on the wall signed by Chuck Jones.
Oh, that's really cool. But
Um,
Abe was an animator who worked in Chuck Jones's unit, and
mhm,
then Abe went on to be a director himself, sometimes with Chuck, sometimes alone.
mhm.
And that's kind of when I realized this guy's really legendary. So I got in touch with his family, and his daughter came on the podcast for a 100th birthday tribute to Abe. And she was so impressed that she and Jerry Beck, who's an animation historian, invited me to write a blog post on Jerry's blog to celebrate Abe's 100th.
Oh, nice. Oh,
So
very cool.
that got out this summer, and it was really something. I was like, oh my god, something I wrote is now out there. It was
Yeah,
exactly like how you had explained when you saw your book right next to your favorite book. You
yeah,
know, here I
yeah.
was, my words talking about cartoons that I love and that a lot of our listeners love, and I was like, this feels good.
Well, it's a, I don't know if I guess maybe you can relate to this. It's kind of the same thing, is that when you're writing something or producing something or whatever it happens to be, you're kind of doing it in a vacuum a little bit. There might be a number of people there helping you, especially if it's a show, but you're like in your own little world making this thing. And really the goal is to finish it, make it good, and to deliver it to the
Hmm.
the network and then you're done.
Hmm.
And for this is going to sound so stupid because it is, but and so for the longest time, it was weird when someone would say to me, "Hey, I saw your show," and I'm like, "Really? You actually saw it? It was on the air? I mean, you say it was an odd concept that, as you said, it was out there, and it's
Hmm.
a little bit, it's humbling and a little bit nerve-wracking too, because you're like, "Oh my gosh, people
Yeah.
are watching this stuff. I better try harder."
Yeah. Well, I can tell you this. When I was at HalCon and uh, at the events I saw you at, somebody actually right next to me took a video of you talking and posted it to Instagram and said, "This guy created Are You Afraid of the Dark?" So
Yes.
I was like, and until that screening, I had never actually watched an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark before. I mean, I knew of it, but I never actually watched it. I gotta
Uh,
say, I was impressed. I really
okay.
liked it.
Well, I'm glad. Well, there's a funny thing. I don't know if I said this in one of our talks, but I'll say it now.
Go
But
ahead.
there's in addition to what I just said is an odd thing that, oh boy, you make this thing and then so I mean, I'm over it now. Okay, now I know that people are going to be watching these things. But one thing I truly did not anticipate is that people are going to be watching it 30 years later.
Mm,
And so that blog post that you made, that's going to live forever. And someone's going to read it 20, 30 years from now. So you start to realize that, oh my God, when you're making a show, you're making hundreds of decisions every day.
hmm.
If you factor in the script as well, you're making thousands of decisions every day. And you make decisions based on what you think is the best decision to make at the time for whatever reason. And so here, I'll make something up. So when somebody comes up to me, we're shooting something, someone comes up to me and say, "Do you want to use the blue spoon or the red spoon?" And I'll be like, "Oh, blue spoon." you don't expect that 30 years later someone's going to call you out for saying, why would they ever put a blue spoon in that show? That should have been a red spoon. Like, oh my God, I made that decision 30 years ago, and it's come back to haunt me to this day. My God.
I mean, like, what difference would it make anyway? It's just a little spoon.
I mean, there are some times where people point something out and they're totally correct in saying, something that over the years I thought, oh boy, that was a bad choice. Something more impactful than a blue or red spoon. But I know what one came out. We did an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark where it was actually one of our best episodes. But there was one moment where there was a special effect that was kind of cheesy. No, it wasn't kind of cheesy. It was cheesy. And
Fair enough.
every time if I'm with someone, I want to sneeze when that's on, so they'll look away from it, so they won't see that cheesy moment that it's so badly done. In an episode otherwise is terrific. And then I saw something on social media a couple months ago where someone's like, "Wow, it's one of my favorite episodes, except for that shot where the gargoyle flies through." I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm still paying for that. I can't believe it." So yeah, so just know that when you write something, it lives forever.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about how Are You Afraid of the Dark came about? Because I remember you had said that you were never interested in writing stuff for kids, but then you got to thinking, oh, but what if I did? And then,
Oh,
boom, the show's born.
I've been writing for kids before that.
Mm-hmm.
It is very true that I didn't expect to write for kids. The reason I was writing for kids is because I think that's what I'm good at. That's what you have to do. You have to find out what you're good at, go with
Fair enough.
it. And I think the reason I'm good at it is I have a certain way of looking at things, and I love supernatural stuff, and I love science fiction, and I love writing adventures, and that just seems to kind of skew a little bit younger than I'm not writing Dune, but um, so my style kind of lends itself to, I say, the young and the young at heart. So I've been writing for kids quite a bit before that. Um, with Are You Afraid of the Dark came about because I'm a co-creator of the show. Actually, I created with my partner Ned Candle, and we had done a show together. I wrote for him called Encyclopedia Brown Boy Detective, which was on HBO. And he said to me, "Let's come up with something on our own. No, let's make up our own original idea." There you go. So it's not adapt something. Let's just come up with the original idea. And we had this idea of writing or creating. It was going to be direct to video. Back in those days, it was direct to video, and then it got to be direct to DVD, and then it's streaming and it's on demand. But this was direct to video, where it was bedtime stories for lazy parents. We didn't call it that, but I since called it that. Where the idea was we get some old time actors sitting in a nice easy chair in front of a roaring fire with a big book that said fairy tales, and we'd have them read fairy tales, and we'd record it and we package it and sell these tapes, make $1 million. And the idea was that parents who didn't feel like reading to their kids that night, they'd have this old man reading to them, and they put the video into the kids, say, "Good night, Junior," and see the video, the fairy tales. Where we hit a brick wall was with what fairy tales we were going to do. It was going to be Three Little Pigs, Little Red Riding Hood. It all seemed so boring and done. And so my partner Ned asked me the infamous question. He said, "What kind of stories did you like when you were a kid?" And I said, "I liked scary stories." So suddenly fairy tales became scary tales. And then it was weird to have an old man telling scary stories to little kids, which was odd. So we're like, well, so how do you tell, who tells scary stories? Like, well, how about if kids tell scary stories? Where do they tell scary? Oh, they sit around a campfire. So the old man goes away, the fireplace goes away, the fireplace becomes a campfire. We have a bunch of kids sitting around a campfire telling scary stories. And then we said, well, why stop there? Why don't we actually show the scary story? So suddenly the budget goes up. Suddenly it's no longer direct to video. Suddenly it's a show. And then we took that to Nickelodeon and said, we're going to do this. And I mean, a long time later, they're like, yes. So that's how the show, that was the really, really early incarnation of how the show came to be. But it started out as fairy tales for little kids and ended up being scary tales for older kids. And the real inspiration for the show, there are a lot of inspirations for the show, but the A number one was the Twilight Zone.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, and it kind of bugs me to this day that a lot of people talk about the show. That doesn't bug me. I love the fact they talk about the show, but it's like the meter for how good or not good an episode was, how scary it was. And that really wasn't the goal of the show. If my goal was solely to scare kids, it would have been a lot scarier. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to create these really weird, compelling, twisted, macabre stories like you'd see in the Twilight Zone. Wasn't that scary? If you ever go back and watch that show, it wasn't that scary. It was just weird and surprising and clever. So that was really my goal with Twilight Zone. So, for example, the episode that Will Friedle was in, the guy who you spent time with at Halcon, that was truly not a scary episode. That was a story about a kid who actually went back in time to Revolutionary War days, and he had to change something that happened 200 years before. And so, other than being chased around by a bunch of redcoats, he wasn't. There was no monster. There was no boogeyman that was jumping out at him. So it was all kind of a weird, ironic story that happened. So that's really where that came together to be Are You Afraid of the Dark? Not necessarily let's scare the crap out of little kids as much as we
That would have
can.
been an interesting name for a TV show. Let's scare the crap out of little
Yeah,
kids.
right. Yeah. Yeah, then we never would have made it.
I mean, maybe you would have made it on like an adult network like HBO or ABC or something.
Well, that's I mean, a good example of that is Stranger Things. I mean, that was a show that really
Yeah.
wasn't made for kids. It was made for
Yeah, I mean,
adults.
I'm working on a horror show right now, actually. I'm not really on set for a lot of it, but when I can't even talk that much about it. But sometimes when I read the actual scripts for it, like I can really visualize it. And there's like with it being a horror show, sometimes I can't even visualize all the scary stuff. And then I actually went back and watched the first season, and I was like, okay, I can't make I couldn't even make it past 2 episodes. I'm working on the second season right now, so
Well, that's the kind of beauty of scary is the scary. I mean, I'm pitching scary stories all the time, and I have a couple different shows that I'm pitching right now, and that
nice.
is given the premise. Unless you're doing the Jeffrey Dahmer story, that pretty much is what it is. But but there's not a lot of wiggle room there. But no, I take that back. Even with that, there are degrees of how icky it can be. I am not a horror fan at all.
Same.
Um, I think it's just that's too easy. In fact, it's just and what's really scary to me is not what happens; it's what you think might happen, and that's where tension comes in, and that's where you get scared, and that's where you start sweating. You're like, oh my god, what's going to be behind that door? And it might be nothing, but
Hmm.
that's the kind of stuff that I like. I love ghost stories. I like mysteries. But any story, you could look at that script, like you said, you look at it and go, okay, I don't know. I guess it could be scary, and it can be made and not be scary at all. And that same script could be made and knock your socks off, be horrifying. It's
Hmm.
all how it's visualized and how it's cut.
Right. So you got to film Are You Afraid of the Dark in Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
And you had talked at Halcon about how that came up, and it's such a funny story. That was basically Nickelodeon's idea.
It was well, sort of. It was. We were all set to go. We developed the show. We're ready to go. Wrote a bunch of scripts, and Nickelodeon calls us in, and we're like, "Yay, here we go. We're going to get a show." And they said, "Yeah, we love your show. We want to make it, but we only want to pay for half of it." And we're like, "Wait, what?" And this was the first show I had produced. I didn't know how TV worked at that point. I didn't realize that it's a little different with streamers, but typical broadcast TV and cable TV, the original broadcaster doesn't pay for the whole thing. They pay for maybe half of it or 60% of it or whatever. The other half comes from the studio that's making it because the studio can then take it and sell it internationally.
Hmm.
So Nickelodeon said, we only want it on Nickelodeon in the United States. We don't care what anything about anything else, but we recognize that everything else has value to it. So if you can come up with the other half of the money, we'll make it. So like I didn't have that kind of money. I didn't have millions of dollars at my disposal. So my partner found this company in Canada in Montreal called Cinar, which up to that point had only made animation.
And for anyone who doesn't know what Cinar is, I think it's called Wild Brain now, but it eventually was known as Cookie Jar Entertainment, and they did Arthur, Caillou, a bunch of shows that I
Yep.
grew up with, a bunch of shows that you guys probably grew up with. You've definitely probably seen the Cinar logo before. I'll put a little picture right there in the edit of it,
Yep.
and that'll probably be familiar to you. But Cinar was the one that ended up producing the show.
Yep. Well, co-produced it.
Right.
Um, yeah, they were really big in the 90s.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say most of what I watched on like I watched I watched a lot of PBS Kids and Treehouse, a lot of like
Mhm.
back in the 2000s,
Mhm.
and I saw the Cinar logo quite a lot.
Yeah, yeah, they were huge.
Mhm.
They also went down in flames because they were crooks and they went out of business.
Oh,
Um,
damn. I did not know
yes.
that.
Oh yeah. It was the longest civil trial in Canadian history. Uh,
Jeez.
I won't bore anybody with that, but they went out of
Yeah,
business.
fair enough. Yeah.
Um, so when you say so, Cookie Jar isn't Cinar.
Mm.
Cookie Jar bought Cinar's library,
Right.
so they owned all of Cinar's properties. Um, and then Cookie Jar either became or got, I don't know how it all worked, but it's now owned by DHX Media, which is another Canadian company. So the Canadian half of Are You Afraid of the Dark is now with a company called DHX Media. And in the States, it's still Nickelodeon. So,
Right.
but the way it works is that Cinar back then they put in half money, and in order to do that, our requirement was we had to shoot it in Canada because they got all sorts of tax breaks and whatnot in Canada. So that's how we ended up in Montreal. Casino was in Montreal. So
Right.
that's how we ended up shooting the show in Montreal, in a French-speaking province, by the way, of which I do not speak French. So
Yeah, I
that
run
was a
into
big challenge.
that. I visit Montreal sometimes, like in summers, because my family lives out there, and I run into that problem quite a lot.
Yeah, it's uh, it, the only thing that saved me was because I was the boss, so they kind of had to be nice to me. So so I didn't get the, and also I was from the United States, so that made it a little bit easier. But it was a real challenge in trying, and most of the crew is French Canadian, and I think that doing that actually really added to the show, to the look of the show, because especially in the art department, whether you're a set decorator, so with set design, production design, hair, makeup, wardrobe. These were all French Canadians, and they brought a real French sensibility to the show, which really helped when we were doing odd things, weird ball things, and whatnot. It was it was more of a challenge to do the normal stuff than it was to do the wacky stuff because the French Canadians didn't necessarily have a typical Midwest United States sensibility about how kids dressed and what they looked like and whatnot. So it's like, no, they can't be wearing black on the thing. It's not gonna work. So, but when it came to creating weird haunted houses and whatnot, oh, the stuff was great, and that sensibility was really wonderful.
Hmm.
So that really helped the show, even though I had trouble making myself understood.
Hmm. Excuse me. And you also wrote a couple of episodes under the name Chloe Brown.
Yeah, that was because that came to the whole tax credit thing, and
Right.
Cinar wouldn't let me have my name all over the show. So
Because in the episode that you screened at HalCon, it said written by Chloe Brown, and you had
right,
explained, oh yeah, they didn't want my name all over it.
yeah, it was Chloe Brown was my cat,
Oh
um,
wow, that's funny.
and for having done that, that's one of the reasons why Cinar went out of business because you're not supposed to do that. They gave
Well,
it,
that's not fun for them.
yeah, well, they deserved it.
Oh,
They they I mean they basically said to me, it's like, look, you either get the writing credit or you get the executive producer credit. Which do you want? And I'm like, but I'm both. And they're like, yeah, we can't put your name on both of these things. So it's like,
things have
but
changed now.
it's something that happens in Canada all the time. They just they were doing a way bigger bad things than that, believe me. But
God.
kind of that was kind of the first chink in the armor that people started to say, hey, this company isn't on the up and up. So yeah,
Hmm.
um, let me put it this way: I had RCMPs on my door down here in Canada and in Los Angeles, investigating that company. Yeah, it was a weird ending.
Yikes.
Yeah,
Holy crap. Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
So, you also did a little bit of writing for Ghostwriter on PBS.
yeah. Very little.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that show? Have you seen that?
I know of it. I
Yeah, I don't
might
know if it was even.
I think I might have watched it when I was like really, really little. I recognize the name.
You're probably thinking of the Nicolas Cage movie, which is Ghost Rider.
Okay.
I
Maybe,
didn't
I don't know.
I don't even know if Ghostwriter made it to Canada. It was. Oh, but you said you watched PBS, so maybe because it was on PBS.
Yeah, I
Maybe
watched a lot of PBS back in those days.
it was. Oh, you're a smart kid. The yeah.
It's so funny. A lot of people I've interviewed have been performers and writers for Sesame Street, Between the Lions, which was a PBS
Mhm,
show.
mhm.
So yeah, I guess you can say I was very well educated by
You're very
PBS
well educated.
kids.
You're watching the good stuff, the
Yeah.
educational stuff.
Hmm.
The way that came about, it's kind of interesting in the long run, but and it's one of the reasons why I got into writing for kids was because I lived in Connecticut at the time, which is just outside of New York City, and a lot of kids programming was based out of New York, so that's where the opportunities were. Um, and I wrote a lot of ABC after school specials, which you probably never saw. But these people, Children's Television Workshop approached me and they said we have the show called Ghostwriter. Well, I didn't create it. They had the whole concept and whatnot. And they said, would you write the first episode for it? It was actually 4 episodes. So, and this is before I got picked up for series. So I was like, yeah, sure. So I wrote the 4 episodes. It had nothing to do with the production. I just wrote it. And around the same time is when I made Are You Afraid of the Dark? And another series, which we did with Cinar actually, called Crisscross, which was for Showtime in the States. And so these 3 pilots get made. It was the summer of '91. These 3 pilots get made. And I was still living in Connecticut. And when you make a pilot for a TV series, you have no idea if it's actually going to become a series or not. You just make
Yeah.
it, you earn it, and cross your fingers. And I was thinking, if I'm going to be serious about this TV thing, I think I've got to move to Los Angeles. So it was the summer of '91 that I moved across country and moved to Los Angeles. Well, lo and behold, all 3 of those shows got picked up. Ghostwriter shot in New York. Are You Afraid of the Dark shot in Montreal, and Crisscross shot in Nottingham, England. So
Wow.
yeah. So fortunately, I didn't have to go to England to do that. I could
Hmm.
write it from here, but if I had just waited another 6 months, life would have been a lot easier. I wouldn't have had to be on planes all the time, flying from Los Angeles to all these places. And they asked me to be head writer for Ghostwriter, but I didn't create that show, but the other 2 shows I created or been part of creating it. So
Hmm.
and was producing them as well. So that's why I picked those other 2 shows and didn't do Ghostwriter. But Ghostwriter went on for 3 series, whatever, and it's been rebooted. It's on Apple TV Plus now, a whole new version of Ghostwriter. Of which I wrote a book for them actually. So that's kind of interesting. So it all
For
connects.
for Ghostwriter or for the company that does Ghostwriter?
For Ghostwriter. It's a
Okay.
new company now. What's
Hmm.
I guess it's still Sesame Workshop or Children's Television Workshop.
Yeah. Yeah, Sesame Workshop it's called now. I
Yeah,
sometimes I still say Children's Television Workshop. I know I really shouldn't, but I still do.
yeah. It's roughly the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So what was funny? A friend of mine runs used to run. I guess she still runs uh, Apple TV Plus, the family division, and she
Mhm.
said, "Yeah, we're doing this show, a reboot of a show called Ghostwriter," and she had no idea that I'd written the pilot for it, and way back when. And the concept now, the show's about literacy. So what we're doing, the version we're doing now is we're gonna have these books, and in each 4 episode arc, uh, I haven't even watched it, frankly, so I don't know exactly why this happens, but it does. There's a ghost, and somehow the ghost is something that allows characters to come out of books into real life.
Mhm.
And in the first season, they said we're using classic stories, so they're using Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, they're using Frankenstein, and they're using Jungle Book. And said we like an original story too, original book. So would you write one for us? And being an author, so I was like, sure. so so I wrote a book that's actually on the reboot of Ghostwriter, ironically because and then I wrote the pilot to Ghostwriter too. So that's kind of fun. So things all come back. Here you go again. 30 years later, nothing ever dies. It just comes back.
Right. Hmm. Another series that you created that is really popular is Flight 29 Down. Um,
Yeah,
how did that come about?
that was that show was a real anomaly, and the reason I say that is because one of the reasons I got into writing books is because on and about late '90s, I'm still making Are You Afraid of the Dark, but children's TV really changed,
Hmm.
and there was a renaissance in the 90s for children's television, um, because there was something for everybody. There was comedies, there was dramas, there was variety shows, there was news shows, you name it. But somehow everything kind of went directly to comedies in the late 90s,
Hmm.
especially the Disney Channel and Nickelodeon. And I
Yep.
don't write these things, these four camera kind of snarky comedies. It's just not what I do. It's not, doesn't interest me. So that's when I decided, well, if I want to keep writing the stuff that I write, I'm going to start writing books. That's one of the things that pushed me into writing books. Um, but for whatever reason, oh, actually, I shouldn't say for whatever reason. I know the reason. Um, a cable company called Discovery Kids in the States had not given up the ghost yet on making interesting shows. They, in the United States, there's an FCC rule that every network has to produce 3 hours of educational children's programming a week. And they do not want to produce this because it does not make them enough money.
Hmm.
So, but they're forced into, and usually it's on Saturday morning where they show these things. So, a lot of the networks have their own built-in kids division. So, for example, ABC is owned by Disney. So Disney made shows for ABC for Saturday morning. Um, CBS, Viacom has Nickelodeon. So Nickelodeon shows would be on CBS in the morning. NBC did not have a kids arm. So they made a deal with this Discovery Kids, which is a small channel that nobody watches, to say, could you program shows for us? Saturday morning was 3 hours. So for 5 years, they had this deal. And there was a producer. He produced a very popular show called Lizzie McGuire. Do you ever watch that when you were younger?
Yeah, I actually just started rewatching it. Yes, I
Okay,
was a big Lizzie McGuire kid back in the 2000s.
there you go. So if you see his name is Stan Rogo, and
Yes, yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yep.
all right. So he produced Lizzie McGuire, and for whatever reason, he went to Discovery Kids, or Discovery Kids went to him and said, "We want you to make a couple shows for us." And he's like, "Okay." So he made a deal, but he's not a writer. He didn't have any shows. So he I got hooked up with him, and he said to me, "Do you have anything I could make?" And I didn't. And I was like, "Well, I have this one show that I've been working on. It's called 29 Down, and it's an adult show. It's like a 10 p.m. type show. It's a show. It's about 29 people who crash land on a tropical island, and they have to figure out how to survive.
So
And
it's kind of like Lord of the Flies,
well, it was, yes, yeah. Well,
except
pretty
less
much.
except less dark.
No, no, no. It was going to be as dark as Laura. I mean, this was
Oh,
an adult. There was going to be
jeez.
murders and drug use. I mean, this was like, this is a no holds barred. This is going to be a vicious. What would really happen? It was Lord of the Flies for adults. It really was. I wasn't getting any traction with that idea because, and I heard little bits and pieces while I was pitching it around. The ABC was developing a tropical island show of people who had crash landed on a tropical island called Lost. So I don't know if you know that show, but it was a massive hit. And so it was, fortunately, I never sold my show, because if I had, I would have been dead in the water, because once Lost came out, then no, there's not going to be any other show like that. So I said to this guy, Stan, I was like, well, the only thing I've got is this show about these people who crash land and they're killing each other, they're burners, they're ties, drugs. And he said, can you make it for kids? And I was like, yes, I can. so so 29 down, went from 29 people down to 7 people, and it became a kid show, which was a cross between, the way I describe it's funny you said that, is a cross between Lord of the Flies and Gilligan's Island. So it wasn't a comedy, but it wasn't a hairy drama either.
Hmm.
And it was about a group of kids. They were stuck on this island. Like, what are we going to do? So it's all about, how do we find water? How do we get food? How do we get shelter? How do we govern ourselves? What are we going to do? We're on our own here. So it was actually a really good show,
Hmm.
and it lasted for. We did 2 seasons, and as we're shooting the second season, the Discovery Kids NBC deal went away. Like, it ran its 5 years and it was over.
Ooh.
So we knew before we finished shooting the second season, we're done. The show's not going to go on anymore. But a funny thing happened is that one of the stars of that show was one of the stars of High School Musical.
Right, Corbin Blue.
So, Corbin Blue. So suddenly Corbin's a big star in that world. And so Discovery Kids has this show with Corbin, like, ooh, maybe we make some money off it. Maybe we can do a home DVD deal. And then they realize, but those kids, they're still stuck on the island. By the end of season 2, they're stuck on the island. We have to end it somehow. And I said, well, why don't we just make a movie? We'll make a 2-hour movie that wraps it all up. So we did that. So we did 2 seasons, then a 2-hour movie, and then that was the end of it. So and so I'm really proud of that show. We made it on like a dime, but if I do say so myself, it's a really really good show, and I wish more people had a chance to see it. But it was on Discovery Kids, and of which 4 people get that channel. So so we not many. The other day, I forgot where I was, but if there were, there, I've done a lot of things in my career, but the things I'm best known for are these 2 things. It's Are You Afraid of the Dark and this Pendragon book series. So whenever somebody comes up to me, they're usually a fan of one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And which is great. I love it. And it's great to talk about it. I'm glad they are and whatnot. So when every so often somebody comes up and says, "Oh, I'm a big fan of your show." I'm like, "Oh, thank you." And they're like, "Flight 29 down." I'm like, "Oh my God, thank you. That's so great that someone else is talking about something else other than those 2 things that I'm known for." So that's kind of fun.
Well, how about we get into something else that you're probably known for, the Disney movie Tower of Terror. And I understand that that was actually shot at the ride.
About a minute of it was shot at
Okay.
the
Okay.
ride.
What was that like?
That came about because we had done 5 seasons of Are You Afraid of the Dark, and
Mm-hmm.
then it was over. The Nickelodeon only wanted 65 episodes, so the show was over. We eventually came back 2 years later to make 2 more seasons because Cinar wanted more episodes because they
Mm-hmm.
sold it internationally and they wanted new episodes to kind of prime the pump. So we came back and did 2 more seasons. But in that interim, Disney came to me and said, "We've got this idea um, to start making movies out of our theme park rides. It hadn't
Mm-hmm.
been done before." And we've got this Tower of Terror thing, which is right up your alley because you've been making Are You Afraid of the Dark? So you want to make this movie, come up with a movie. So I like, yeah, sure. So I wrote and directed this movie, and it was really good. It was made for A Wonderful World of Disney on ABC. It
Oh,
wasn't a huge
nice.
budget, yeah, and we didn't. I don't know if you've ever ridden that ride, if you've ever been to Disney World or whatever.
I have been to Disney World. My sister so badly wanted to go on the Tower of Terror, and I was like, oh God, even the name freaks me out. I was 13. My dad was like, all right, I'll go with you. He's like takes 3 steps. And he's like, I can't. I break into a sweat thinking about it. And my sister's like, you suck. I
It's
don't
a
know
good
if
ride.
she read it, but I didn't because I was too friggin' scared.
So you've at least seen it from the outside, anyway.
I saw it and thought I was gonna pee myself.
Yeah, it's a good ride. It really, and one of the things, boy, what I said before about it's as much about what you think is going to happen as it is what happens. That's what scary is. The
Mhm.
build up to that ride, to the moment of where it's a free fall type ride, the elevator falls down. The build up to that is so perfectly done, where you're just, oh my God, the tension starts to build from the time you step into this thing. So, oh my God. So did we shoot it down there? We actually did not shoot most of it down there
Okay.
because um, the for 2 reasons. One is I thought we would shoot it down there because okay, you only got as close as to being outside the place. If
Hmm.
you went inside the place, it looks like a 1939 hotel that was just abandoned,
Hmm.
and it's full of cobwebs and dust. And it's really fabulous. It's just the art direction is just incredible. And so I said right off the bat, it's like we can't just make up a fake hotel. We've got to duplicate. We've got to shoot this. We've got to shoot. It has to be this lobby. Um, but we figure we can't make this thing, so we're going to shoot it on the ride. And at Disney World, they're like, "Yeah, sure, you can shoot here." I'm like, "Oh, great." He said, "But you can't start till midnight, and you got to be out by like 5 a.m. because they do not close down rides for movie making." I'm like, "Oh, that is not going to work.
Oh
This
God.
can't." On top of that, I also assumed that we were going to be shooting at the Disney MGM Studios, which is what it was called. Now it's called Disney Hollywood Studios, I think,
Hmm.
because they have sound stages there.
Mhm.
So I thought we'd be
Oh
shooting it.
yeah,
And
that's right.
they actually shoot things there. So I thought between the ride and those stages, that's where we'd be shooting it. And turns out that in the time period where we were going to shoot, when we were going to shoot it, uh, Tom Hanks had produced a series for HBO called From the Earth to the Moon. It was all
Mhm.
about the Apollo space program. And he had those sound stages booked for like a year. And so
Jeez.
nothing else was happening down there. So it's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So we decided to say, okay, we're not going to shoot it in Florida. We'll shoot in California, and we will build that lobby. We'll build that set. And a quarter of the budget went just to building that set, and we duplicated it almost exactly. It was just an incredible job. We duplicated the thing. The only thing it didn't have was the ceiling. It didn't have a ceiling on. What we did shoot down in Florida was the exteriors of the quote the hotel. Not, I mean, it's a ride, but we don't say it's a
I know what
ride.
you mean. Yeah.
It's the hotel. So Steve Gutenberg was the star of this thing. So in
Mhm.
Los Angeles, I'd shoot the angle looking down at him, like as he arrives at the hotel for the first time, and he goes to this gate, and he looks up, and then you cut to his point of view, and it's a shot of the hotel, the ride, and so that point of view shot we shot down on the floor. Um, it, and this one, I mean, we shot a lot of that, but this one scene in particular, which is him walking up, it's a kind of an eerie moment in the movie. It's daytime, but it's eerie and it's quiet, and you're like a far off crow cawing and wind blowing. It's all kind of spooky as he looks up at this thing. If I have one regret about that movie, I wish, oh, I don't know why I didn't do this, but I should have had the camera guy who's shooting it, because you were on the ground and he's shooting up as if he's the point of view of the person, Steve, who's looking up at the hotel. I should have had him while you're shooting just tilt the camera down to ground level, because what you would have seen is that we were in line with thousands of other people trying to jostle, trying to make our way to the ride. They're all, "Hey, you're making a movie? Yeah, we're making a movie." They didn't stop the ride for us. We're jostling all these people. One, "Hey, what are you doing? You making a movie?" So that would have been a fun blooper kind of thing to show that, oh, the spooky hotel. But, oh no, but there are actually thousands of people just waiting. That's, yeah, so that was a fun movie to make, and
Mhm.
uh,
I
uh,
bet.
and it came out pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's wrap it up by talking a little bit about your works as an author, starting with Pendragon, which of course is the big
The other one,
author work for you. Yeah.
right?
Can you? Yeah. Where did that come from? Like, and was that meant to be like just one book, or did you know you wanted to make it into a series?
At first, it was going to be one book,
Hmm.
um, and I'm an outliner, and I hate to use the term outline because it sounds so formal, but I'm more of a, I think through stories before I actually write the words that people are going to read. And as I sat down to write those words or write those outlines, I realized, ooh, there's really more to the story than just this one story that I'm have in my head. And so in like a week or two, I outlined all 10 books. And it's this massive story about Bobby Pendragon and his journey through time and space.
In a
Uh,
week, 10 books. Holy shoot.
yeah, well, I mean, it sounds more impressive than it was, because it's, I really outlined one story. I looked at it as one huge megalopolis story. So I saw, and it's about this guy that goes on this adventure. And so with each book, I found the different beats of what's going to happen to him from a global point of view in this big story, and his fight against this evil spirit called Saint Dane. Um, and then so that's what it is. It's really about Bobby versus Saint Dane for this whole story, 10 books worth. But
Mhm.
each book is very different than the other one. They go to different territories. So one book takes place on a territory that's completely covered in water, and people live in these floating barge cities.
Oh
Another one
wow.
is in New York City in 1937. Another one is in a city that's crumbling and falling down with these big pyramids where people live inside virtual reality worlds. Um, so each book has its own unique setting and unique
Yeah.
conflict that's happening. That
That's
and
very
it
creative. Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and each book concludes, within itself. But each book is also the next chapter in the big story as to why is this all happening? Who is the Saint Dane guy? Why has Bobby been chosen to be this guy? So, and that's what progresses over the course of 10 books. And it's an epic. It's an epic. I think one of the reasons why I haven't gotten it set up as a movie yet is because,
I was just about to ask you to kind of screw around if you were ever planning to make it into a movie, because
believe me, I've been
every
trying.
movie out there is an adaptation of a book.
I've been trying for a long time, and who knows why it hasn't happened yet. I've optioned it a number of times, but I think one of the hesitations is that one of the things that makes it so good is that each book is so completely different than the others. I mean, you
Mhm.
look at Harry Potter, as great as Harry Potter is, it all kind of takes place in the same place.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, I have to confess, I was never really much of a Harry Potter kid. I like it. How I got into it was I knew what it was, because I knew it was such
Sure.
a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
And then my dad, when I was 10, got tickets to an advanced screening of, what was it, The Half-Blood Prince. 'Cause
Hmm.
I was 10, so I went to it and I was like, this is really cool. Never read the books, never seen the movies before. I just thought that it was really, really cool. And I didn't get to see Deathly Hallows Part 1, but I saw Deathly Hallows Part 2.
Oh
Very,
no.
very stupidly not seeing the first one.
Yeah. No.
But I was amused by it, so to speak.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing with Pendragon too. It's like as much as each one is so completely different, they also kind of have to be done in order because they're all a story. The one leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next, and so it's just it's proven too daunting for studios to say, "Oh my God, we don't know how the hell we're going to do this." Because it's like committing to one means we're committing to 10. We can't. And as good as it is and as successful as it is, it ain't Harry Potter.
Yeah.
There are few things that are. So yeah, one of these days, I'm kind of toying with trying to do it animated. That might be more a likely way to go.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking, it would be interesting to see it as not really a mini series, but a bunch of films based upon the Pendragon series, like being released individually on like a streaming network or something.
Yeah, yeah. Do it like do a 10 episode short series, 10
Yeah,
hour long episodes, and each one is a book.
yeah,
Um, that's probably the best way to do it, frankly.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, you heard it. You heard it here first. Stay tuned. You never know what's gonna happen.
yeah, I don't know. So if I were to bet, I would say it's probably not going to happen. But but you never know.
Mhm.
So
And
it's,
more and Morpheus Road. You also did the series Morpheus Road.
yeah, that's a spooky trilogy. I went back to
Uh-huh.
my spooky roots, and in fact, it kind of dovetails with the Pendragon mythology too. So as the 3 books go on, some of the characters from Pendragon come back. And so it's really fun for people who love Pendragon to read this thing like, oh my God, that's so and so. That's really cool.
Do you think
Um,
you'll ever do more of them?
of those, no. Now
Okay.
those definitely. I mean, even especially when people say, "Oh, would you ever write another Pendragon?" And it's like, I'll never say never to anything, but uh, the story finished. Really, and if you ever, you're probably not going to read it, but it's 10 books. It's definitely a conclusion.
Hmm.
There's no every loose end is tied up and is done. So it would
Yeah,
feel
I
kind of
mean, like
cheesy.
when I got into film, I really, really, I was young. What did I know? Talking about Harry Potter, I really wanted to make an eighth Harry Potter movie, and all my friends were like, "Yeah, that's never gonna happen."
And well,
And
and if it
then when I
does,
finally saw Deathly Hallows Part Two, I was like, "Yeah, this is a nice ending.
yeah,
It's a
and
nice ending."
it's good. It's satisfying.
Yeah.
And so therefore, that's not to say you couldn't come up with another idea.
Hmm.
But and in fact, she has. I mean, she's gone back and there are all sorts of spin-offs and whatnot for
Yeah.
Harry Potter. But
Hmm.
it feels a little mercenary. I don't know. It's just a money grab to do that. Um, so I doubt I would. And then Morpheus Road, it is a complete story. And I have another trilogy called the Silo Chronicles, which is really good. It's a science fiction thing. It
Oh,
it
nice.
is. I mean, and when you get to the end of it, you're like, oh, that really feels good. That's satisfying. It makes sense. It's all together. To then say, and then, but it's not really quite over yet. It's like, I mean, there would have to be a great idea to justify that, but I'm not trying to come up with it. So,
Fair
and
enough.
technically, I guess maybe I did extend Pendragon a little bit by bringing some of the Pendragon characters into Morpheus Road, but it wasn't the same story. It
Mm,
wasn't Bobby versus Saint Dane. It was peripheral characters that came back. So,
fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, DJ, that's all I've got here. Is there anything else you want to say to finish?
Yeah, if anybody wants to, you should go to my website, djmchalebooks.com.
Link in the
See,
description.
yeah. Oh, good. And it's, I've got a whole bunch of other things there too. The website doesn't really deal with my TV shows at all. It's all
Mhm.
about, which is why it's called djmchalebooks.com, I guess. It's not called
Fair enough.
djmchalevshows.com, but it lists all the books that I've done. I've done plenty more other than that. So yeah, do that. And if you want to write to me on the website, there's a little thing that says email DJ, and I answer all my own email. So
Mhm.
and I don't hold on to people's email addresses. I probably should have, but I don't. I'm not a marketing genius like that.
Fair
But I
enough.
answer my emails. But
Mm.
that was fun, Jim. This was fun talking to you. It's good
It
to
was
see
great.
you.
It was good to see you again. I really enjoyed getting to chat with you in a lot fuller than I did at HalCon because, I did a lot of walking around at HalCon. There was so many people I wanted to see.
Yep.
Um, and like I met Carrie Elwes. Yeah, Carrie Elwes was
Yep.
there.
Yep.
Did you get to meet him?
Yes, I did. Yes, I
What'd you
did.
think of
In
him?
the green room. It was great. It's fun to you know it's fun when it's fun to see a celebrity who you only know them from their work.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's kind of a weird thing. Seeing seeing a celebrity to me is kind of like when I saw Big Ben for the first time.
Wow.
It's kind of like here's something that I've seen in stories and songs and pictures forever, and there it is for real. So to see Carrie Elwes, it's like, oh my God, I've seen The Princess Bride a million times, and there he is for
Yeah,
real.
you should have seen how many people were dressed up as Princess Buttercup in the line.
Oh, no kidding.
Like I went up to him and he says, "Hi, what's your name?" I said, "Hi, I'm James." He goes, "Nice to meet you, James." And I'm struggling to speak, and I'm like, "Oh my God, it's so nice to meet one of my favorite actors in the friggin' world." And he puts his hand on his heart and he goes, "Thank you, that's very nice." Now I really do like The Princess Bride, but I think my favorite movie he's ever done is Liar Liar with Jim
Oh,
Carrey. And
oh, oh, God, I forgot he was in that. Yeah, that
yeah,
was a
and
good movie.
so when I went to the autograph signing with him, I picked up a Liar Liar picture from the sign. I said, look, I like The Princess Bride. It's a great movie. Liar Liar is probably my favorite you're in. And he writes, to James, the Claw, referencing that scene.
All right.
He looks
All
at
right.
me. He looks at me and he goes, you're awesome. And I
Oh
said,
my
I
gosh,
forgive you for that lie you just told.
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I deliberately, I just ran into him with Will actually, because Will was actually in my show and Are You Afraid of the Dark, and and he was just kind of there, and it kind of took me by surprise. And I didn't want to go right to Princess Bride because how many times has he heard that?
Yeah.
But so it's good that you did the liar liar thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
but I just
With Wilfred L, like he was in a lot of stuff that I watched, and like I'm waiting on another guest, and there's Will doing nothing, there's me doing nothing, and one of the volunteers looks at me. He says, "You want to talk to Will while you wait?" And I was like, "Sure." I mean, free conversation with Will. My supervisor's like, "You're lucky. I had to pay friggin' $40 for that."
oh, that's funny. Well, fortunately, I had just seen Carrie in Stranger Things,
Oh, I've never
so
actually watched Stranger Things, but I did know he was in that.
he plays a really bad guy.
That does
But
not sound like him at all because he's
no, but
really down. He's so down to earth.
yeah, but he was a really good bad guy, and that's what I said to him. So, I'm glad I had something else to talk. And then also I asked him. He was in a Mel Brooks movie.
Oh yeah.
So I asked him about what it's like working with Mel Brooks and whatnot. I'm sure like, believe me, I know what it's like when you answer the same questions over and over again. I'm sure he said the same thing a million times of hey, Mel Brooks, it was fun, So, but it was a pleasure. It's funny to see a celebrity living in Los Angeles. You see celebrities all the time, and you think you know them,
You're
but you don't.
lucky.
But you don't. Well, you see, you're going to go up to somebody and say, "Hey, how are you? I have nothing to say to you except I like your movies."
Exactly. Yeah. Well,
It's a very
DJ.
short conversation.
Well, now I think we should wrap up our
Yep.
not short conversation. DJ, good to see you again. Thank you
Good
for
to see
coming
you,
on
James.
Nostalgia Talk.
Thank you.
And
My
to
pleasure.
and to all of you listeners, I will see you next time. Peace.